throughout the summer months, the people who had attended the Athlone meeting travelled throughout the country, establishing branches of the Republican Congress. In Waterford, Kilkenny and Westmeath you had branches, and 6 in Dublin, one of which was made up of ex-British Army servicemen and led by Captain Jack White, a founding member of the Irish Citizen Army in 1913. It was an organisation that was growing rapidly, and they were to come together here for their first national meeting at the Rathmines Town Hall. The delegates came from near and far, ranging from 16 trade union sections and trade union councils to the Indian Defence League. There were even delegates here from Britain and the United States to show solidarity with the Congress. The wide variety of delegates in the room here showed that there was a strong appetite for a Republican socialist alternative. The question was, would they be able to bring it together? Trouble was expected at the Rathmines meeting owing to the intense anti-communism in Dublin at the time, and sure enough, a crowd did gather here, between 100 and 200 people, underneath a banner that proclaimed, "God bless our Pope." They were drawn mainly from religious congregations and the blue shirts in the city, and they were addressed by the chairman of South Dublin Fine Gael. So great was the fear of protesters, especially in light of what had happened at Connolly House, that a number of delegates actually left Rathmines Town Hall and went to procure handguns. It's not known whether these handguns belonged to the Irish Citizen Army or were IRA weapons that men had held onto after the split. Regardless, however, there was no need for the handguns on this occasion. This may have been the only time that the left, the radical left, outnumbered anti-communists on the streets of Dublin. Tensions in the room weren't alleviated with the departure of the protesters, however. Most of the motions that were put before the Congress were practical enough and were passed with strong majorities. However, there were 2 opposing motions on the future of the Congress, which would prove bitterly divisive, and Congress was divided into 2 opposing camps. Much of the 2-day Congress was taken over with debating these motions.
And to my horror, I found, a few days before the Congress met, that what part of the people who are very active had in mind was the creation of a new political party, Workers' Republican Party, and that they had used, it was a parliamentary party they had in mind. And that produced a great conflict within the Congress, because I didn't believe that a formation of a new political party, Irish Workers' Party, would do more as Workers' Republican Party. I didn't believe that would do more than scrape it together small, isolated bunches. And in any case, I had no absolute dedication to parliamentary democracy. I wanted workers' democracy.
Michael Price and the 2 Connollys were calling for an explicit socialist party, and they believed in the triumvirate of the party, the trade unions and the armed wing in the form of the Irish Citizen Army. This had been the majority opinion going into the Congress. They also believed in the need for an explicit call for a workers' republic in order to distinguish themselves from the type of republicanism being put forward by Fianna Fáil. They believed that out of Congress there needed to come a socialist party which could challenge the new Free State.
O'Donnell and Gilmore disagree. They argue that the key issue that can mobilise people is a broader front around the idea of the Republic. O'Donnell, argues that his objection to De Valera is not that De Valera isn't a socialist, because De Valera never claimed to be a socialist, but that De Valera isn't a real Republican, and that really the IRA aren't real Republicans either, and that Congress can become a body which wins people around the idea of the Republic. And the problem with that is that most people would have regarded De Valera as a Republican, most people would have certainly regarded the IRA as Republican. But it's the idea of really a broad front versus the idea of an openly socialist party.
In the long term, when you look back on it, I'm not sure whether setting the idea of it eventually becoming a party would have been a good idea. Certainly, when you look at the differences between the people, they are little more than tactical. You couldn't say Nora Connolly or Roddy Connolly didn't understand what the politics of what Peadar O'Donnell was arguing for, because if you follow Roddy Connolly's career, and you see him, he argues for the same thing with Clonoppublic after the war. He's the first one to argue that there should be a kind of a united front with Clonoppublic and Labour, even though he's inside Labour at this time. So it's not that. I also think the communist movement at the time, because it was new, it was full of itself and all of that, I think it would have been very reluctant to look at the idea of joining a party, because it was the party, it was the world party of revolution, and that's the way it would have seen itself. So when you look at the minutiae of what created the split, it's certainly a split that really, because most of the people that were involved in it stayed involved, really doing the same kind of things. The real question was, why couldn't they have found a way of living together? You know, that to me is the kind of is what's to be distilled from looking back at the event. How do you distill that, and what's the value of that if you distill it for the same kind of forces that are around?
Well, I think it has resonances today because we have that same problem. We have a significant party on the left, Sinn Féin. We have smaller parties on the left. We have the collapse of the Labour Party ideologically, but still we have trade union affiliations to it to a considerable extent. How do you bring those forces together, or do you just rely on them each individually to plough their own furrows? So in a sense, it is the same problem, and the principle that the Republican Congress put forward, I think, is one we could learn a lot from in our present thing, that it's, you know, there are parties already in existence. The thing is to find the mechanisms which mean something to enable all of them to cooperate together in a way which actually identifies the real enemy, which isn't the left fighting amongst itself, but is taking on Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and that alliance, which is coming out more and more clearly.
I think when people criticise the Irish left for being prone to schism and the old Brendan Behan joke about the first thing on the agenda being the split, is Republican Congress is where that's coming from. Like, I mean, it was unequivocally anti-capital.
Yes.
That was, I mean, at least they had that one note that, you know, they were all agreed on, and there was no messing around about language or anything. I mean, they were absolutely explicit about it. But I wonder, I'm not a fan of counterfactual history or anything, but had the split not taken place in Rathmines on that occasion, and had Nora Connolly and Michael Price and that group stayed, what would be the chances of their having managed to keep building the movement in terms of the way they had done already?
The O'Donnell-Gilmore wing weren't too concerned whether they called for a workers' republic or just a republic. They wanted to confront De Valera's claim to republicanism head on. They also believed in the need for a united front against fascism and knew they could count on the support of the Communist Party delegates for this.
The Communist Party of Ireland was at that time getting its direction from Moscow through the Communist Party of Great Britain in London at that time. So a wire came through London to be sent to Dublin in advance of the Rathmines meeting, and that wire was improperly delivered. So when they went into the Rathmines meeting, when the Communist Party delegates went into the Rathmines meeting, they were given the wrong information. So what they were told was to oppose a new political party in all circumstances. In other words, to approve the United Front idea. But they were also told to go along with the slogan of Irish Republic as opposed to Workers' Republic. What they were actually supposed to do, what Moscow wanted them to do, was to put forward the idea of a united front that would fight for a workers' and small farmers' republic, which would have probably created a third element within the Congress, and that could have split it three ways, or it could have possibly taken more people from the political party side towards the United Front side.
There was also a recognition that, in fact, in terms of the nature of Irish society at the time, you were not going to rally society in a Republican direction by pushing for a workers' republic. You had to recognise that the working class were a minority, and therefore you did have to have this rural appeal. You had to rally the small farmers in the agitation that was required there, and therefore putting socialism on the agenda was not a realistic prospect. So there was an element of a realistic assessment of the social character of our society and institutional self-preservation.
The debates took place, the final vote was there, and while the broad front proposition was the one that won the day, it won only marginally, 90-something votes to 80-something votes, precipitating a very significant split in the key activists of the Congress in the years afterwards. In some senses, the broad front proposition was developed by what was the Congress and failed miserably. I mean, Frank Ryan and Peadar O'Donnell stood for elections here in Dublin in 1936 and their vote was derisory, as had Connolly's been when he stood in working class communities of Dublin only some decades earlier. And likewise, that those that wanted the Workers' Republic and the standalone revolutionary political party, well, they didn't fare much better either. Ended up joining the Labour Party, trying to shift its direction in a more leftward turn.
Roddy Connolly and Mick Price moved a resolution at their Labour Party conference declaring that the Labour Party would be declaring for a Workers' Republic in 1936. And Norton, who was a rabid reactionary, the leader of the Labour Party, sort of enthusiastically supported this idea of the Labour Party would adopt the slogan of a Workers' Republic. By 1938, when the bishops had finished, Norton was a rabid enthusiast for the abandoning of the concept of Workers' Republic, and to a degree that was the end of Roddy Connolly and Mick Price's, to a degree, political influence inside the Labour Party.
What they were saying was that in terms of what's emerging, we've got to be frank, honest and absolutely transparent in our analysis and in our promises. That you will not break the stranglehold of capital within an imperialist state. You will not overcome the issues that are impacting on you if you think you're going to do it within a capitalist state that has controlled and run from an imperialist centre.
In the end, the United Front motion carried the day with 99 votes to 84, but it left a bitterly divided movement. The Republican Congress newspaper printed letters from both sides of the split in the weeks that followed, though they hardly helped diffuse the situation.
Anybody who really wants to understand those only needs to read George Gilmore's own pamphlet reflecting on those failures. And for him, and I think this is really the crux of it, is it was the failure of the Congress to find an adequate way of integrating the political and the social elements of the Republican struggle and develop a vocabulary and an organisational form that could secure massive popular support for those politics that was its ultimate undoing. And it was the undoing of Clan Republic afterwards. It was the undoing of the Workers' Party and Democratic Left after that. And whether or not it will be the undoing of Sinn Féin, the contemporary manifestation of left republicanism, we don't know yet, and only history will tell. But until we crack that particular problem, we're going to be in endless cycles of left republican failure. Valiant failure it may be, but failure nonetheless. And for me, that's why the Congress is an interesting period of history and one for us to learn from.
What happened here at Mines was a disaster for the Republican Socialist movement in Ireland. Instead of working through their differences and forming a coherent opposition to the dominant parties in the state, the movement was severely crippled. The IRA was positively gleeful that this new organisation, which could have emerged as a challenge to its very existence, seemed to collapse at the very first hurdle. Unfublocked, newspaper of the IRA, joked that Congress delegates could now focus on things like peasant conferences in Lithuania and answering conundrums like, when is a workers' republic not a workers' republic? Much as the IRA would have liked Congress to go away, it didn't. And though severely weakened, it pushed on. It was active in issues like housing, and it also built alliances with some who, as Republicans, it would have bitterly opposed in earlier times.